The decision to wake the other colonists came when Dawn detected something troubling in the upper atmosphere. The young dragon's enhanced senses, augmented by the biological monitoring systems they had developed together, picked up energy signatures that made Maya's blood run cold. Veltar scout ships, conducting systematic sweeps of the planet's surface. "They're looking for survivors," Maya said grimly as she studied the data that Dawn's living sensors had collected. The energy patterns were unmistakable biomechanical signatures that matched Veltar technology perfectly, which means they know some of the escape pods made it to the surface. Silver's response carried deep concern. The great dragon had lived through territorial conflicts before and understood the implications of systematic searching behavior. The Veltar would eventually find the crash site, and when they did, they would not be interested in taking prisoners. Maya gathered the dragons in the cavern's central chamber, where the ancient crystal formations provided both privacy and enhanced communication capabilities. Through a combination of spoken words, mental contact, and gestural language they had developed over their weeks together, she explained the situation to her draconic family. "My people need to wake up," she said. "They need to understand what's happening, and they need to be able to defend themselves. But more than that, they need to understand about you. About all of you." Aurelius's response was immediate and melodic, a series of harmonies that Maya had learned indicated excitement, mixed with nervousness. The golden dragon had been eagerly awaiting the opportunity to meet other humans, viewing them as potential sources of new knowledge and different perspectives on the technological innovations they had been developing. Amethyst was more cautious, her deep violet harmonies expressing concern about human reactions to dragon presence. She had absorbed enough of Maya's stories about human mythology to understand that dragons occupied a complex place in human imagination, sometimes viewed as wise guardians, sometimes as destructive monsters. There was no guarantee that the colonists would be as accepting as Maya had been. Dawn's contribution was characteristically direct. A question about whether the awakening humans would be willing to help fight the Veltar. The copper-scaled dragon had inherited none of Silver's caution about interspecies conflicts. Viewing the approaching enemy ships as a problem that obviously required immediate cooperation to solve, Silver's response was the most complex of all, a harmonic symphony that spoke of hope and fear in equal measures. The great dragon understood that this moment would determine not just the fate of their small community, but potentially the future of dragon-human relations throughout the galaxy. If the introduction went well, it could mark the beginning of a new era of cooperation. If it went badly, it might result in violence that would poison any future attempts at alliance. Maya spent the next day preparing for the awakening process, working with the dragons to create an environment that would be as non-threatening as possible while still demonstrating the remarkable achievements of their partnership. They moved some of their hybrid technology displays to the crash site, setting up examples of dragon-grown electronics, living batteries, and biotechnological healing devices where the colonists could see them immediately upon regaining consciousness. More importantly, Maya prepared herself mentally for what was about to happen. She would need to serve as translator and mediator, helping both species overcome their initial fears and misconceptions. The success of everything they had built together would depend on her ability to facilitate understanding between groups that had no common frame of reference. The awakening process began at dawn, timed to coincide with the natural circadian rhythms that the ship's medical systems had been maintaining throughout the colonists' extended coma. Maya watched nervously as the first passenger stirred, blinking in confusion as consciousness slowly returned. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a xenobiologist specializing in agricultural adaptation, exactly the sort of open-minded scientist Maya had hoped would wake first. The older woman's eyes widened as she took in her surroundings, the partially repaired ship, the alien landscape visible through the hull breach, and most notably, the impossible crystal formations that were clearly providing power to their life support systems. "Maya?" Dr. Vasquez's voice was hoarse from weeks of inactivity. "What happened? Where are we?" Maya helped the scientists sit up, offering water and basic medical attention while explaining their situation. She kept her tone calm and matter-of-fact, focusing on the practical aspects of their survival rather than the more extraordinary elements of their story. Dr. Vasquez listened with the trained attention of someone accustomed to processing complex information quickly. So we're stranded on Zarian Prime with no communications and Veltar ships in the area. Dr. Vasquez summarized. But somehow you've managed to establish a viable shelter and even restore power to essential systems. That's correct, Maya said. But there's something else you need to know. Something that's going to sound impossible until you see it for yourself. Before Dr. Vasquez could respond, other passengers began stirring. Maya found herself repeating the basic situation briefing multiple times as engineers, farmers, medical technicians, and other colonists gradually returned to consciousness. Most were still too weak to move around much, but their questions became increasingly pointed as they absorbed the implications of their predicament. It was Marcus Chun, a systems engineer with no relation to Maya despite their shared surname, who first noticed the anomalous properties of their power source. These energy readings don't match any known technology, he said, studying the crystal formations with professional skepticism. The power output is clean, stable, and theoretically impossible given the apparent size and mass of the generating source. Maya exchanged glances with Dr. Vasquez, who had been observing Maya's behavior with obvious curiosity. The xenobiologist had clearly noticed that Maya seemed far more confident and knowledgeable about their situation than a 17-year-old colonist had any right to be. The technology is impossible by human standards, Maya admitted. But we're not alone on this planet. I've made contact with another intelligent species and they've been helping us survive. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Several colonists tried to stand despite their weakness, looking around nervously for signs of threat. Others peppered Maya with rapid-fire questions about the aliens' appearance, capabilities, and intentions. Marcus demanded to know why she hadn't mentioned this critical information. Earlier in her briefing, Maya raised her hands for calm. I didn't mention them earlier because I knew you would need time to process our basic situation first. And because I wanted you to see the evidence of cooperation before making any judgments about the species involved. She gestured toward the crystal power source, the repaired electronics, and the medical supplies that had kept them all alive during their extended coma. Everything you see here is the result of collaboration between human knowledge and alien abilities. They saved our lives, and they've been protecting us from threats you haven't even learned about yet. Dr. Vasquez spoke up from her position near the medical bay. What kind of threats? Maya's expression grew serious. The Veltar are conducting orbital sweeps, searching for escape pod survivors. When they find us, and they will find us eventually, they won't be interested in taking prisoners. Our only chance of survival is to work with our new allies to either hide from detection or develop defenses that can protect us from attack. The colonists fell silent as they absorbed this information. Maya could see fear and uncertainty in their faces, but also the practical calculation that came from people who had already risked everything to travel to the frontier of human space. They were survivors by nature, people who understood that desperate situations sometimes required unconventional solutions. Marcus was the first to speak. What exactly are we talking about? What kind of aliens have you been working with? Maya smiled, despite the tension of the moment. Dragons, she said simply. Intelligent, magical, technologically sophisticated dragons who have been living in isolation, because their own society rejected them for being different. The silence that followed this statement was profound and telling. Maya could practically see the mental gears turning as the colonists tried to reconcile their scientific worldview with the implications of her words. It was Dr. Vasquez who broke the silence with a question that Maya had been hoping to hear. Can we meet them? Maya's smile widened as she heard the distant sound of massive wings approaching the crash site. Right on schedule, Silver was arriving for their daily morning visit. accompanied by the younger dragons who were eager to finally meet the humans they had heard so much about. Actually, Maya said, I think that can be arranged right now. She stepped toward the hull breach and called out in the harmonic language she had been learning. Silver Dawn, it's time for everyone to meet each other. The colonists watched in stunned silence as 4 magnificent dragons landed gracefully around their crash site, their scales catching the morning light in patterns that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Maya walked confidently toward the largest of them, the great albino whose scales seemed to shimmer with internal starlight. Everyone. The education of both species began by accident. Maya had been explaining the basic principles of electronics to Dawn, using a damaged circuit board from the crash site to demonstrate how electricity flowed through conductive pathways. The young dragon listened with rapt attention, occasionally humming in what Maya had learned was a sign of deep concentration. Then Dawn did something. Impossible, the copper-scaled dragon extended one claw toward the circuit board and somehow channeled raw energy directly into the damaged components. But this wasn't mere electrical current, it was something far more sophisticated. Maya watched in amazement as broken traces repaired themselves. Burned-out resistors reconstituted their carbon matrices, and fried microprocessors began functioning again with perfect efficiency. How did you do that? Maya breathed, staring at the now functional circuit. Bored. Dawn's response was a complex melody that seemed to describe the flow of energy through both the electronic circuit and some parallel system that existed in what Maya could only think of as a magical dimension. The dragon wasn't just generating electricity, it was manipulating the fundamental forces that held matter together, encouraging damaged materials to remember their intended configurations and return to functionality. Maya realized she was witnessing something that human science had theorized but never achieved. Direct matter manipulation at the quantum level. Dragons didn't just use magic, they were living interfaces between the physical universe and whatever deeper reality allowed such phenomena to exist. Word of Dawn's demonstration reached the other dragons quickly. Aurelius arrived first, drawn by Dawn's excited musical narration of the event. The golden dragon examined the repaired circuit board with obvious fascination, then attempted to duplicate the effect on another damaged component. The result was less precise than Dawn's work, but still remarkable. The component functioned, though with modified specifications that actually improved its efficiency beyond original parameters. Amethyst was more cautious, but Maya could see the violet dragon watching from a distance as the younger ones experimented with combining their abilities and human technology. Silver observed everything with the patient attention of a teacher evaluating promising students. Maya began bringing more salvaged electronics from the crash site, providing the dragons with increasingly complex puzzles to solve. In return, she asked them to explain their techniques, trying to understand the principles behind their abilities. The process was slow and often frustrating. Draconic concepts of reality didn't translate easily into human scientific terminology, but gradually, a new understanding began to emerge. Dragons didn't violate the laws of physics so much as they operated according to a more complete set of natural laws that human science hadn't yet discovered. Their abilities were grounded in quantum mechanics, dimensional theory, and energy manipulation techniques that were entirely learnable if one had the right biological interfaces and sufficient training. More importantly, Maya discovered that the process worked in reverse. Human scientific methodology, with its emphasis on systematic observation and hypothesis testing, provided dragons with tools for understanding and refining their own abilities. Dawn's energy manipulation became far more precise after Maya taught her about electron flow and resistance calculations. Aurelius learned to modulate his ability frequency after understanding electromagnetic spectrum theory. Even Amethyst began to participate when Maya demonstrated how human metallurgy could enhance the effectiveness of the crystal formations that dragons used to focus their abilities. The violet dragon's natural talent for growing and shaping crystal matrices, combined with human knowledge of materials science, produced energy storage devices that exceeded anything either species had achieved independently, but it was Silver who provided the breakthrough that changed everything. The great albino dragon had been observing the educational experiments with obvious approval, but had not directly participated until Maya asked about the ancient gardens in the cavern. Silver's explanation, delivered through a combination of mental contact and demonstration, revealed that the dragons didn't just tend the alien plants. They had created them. Dragon biotechnology was based on principles that human genetic engineering couldn't match. Rather than crude manipulation of DNA sequences, dragons could guide evolutionary development at the cellular level, encouraging organisms to develop desired traits through accelerated natural selection and environmental conditioning. The garden plants were living tools, each variety designed for specific purposes: food production, air purification, energy generation, and even information storage. "You've created a living computer," Maya said in wonder, examining a grove of crystalline trees whose root networks seemed to pulse with data transmission patterns. "These plants are processing and storing information in their cellular matrices." Silver's affirmative rumble carried notes of pride and satisfaction. The dragon proceeded to demonstrate how the garden's biological computers could interface with human technology, using the plant's natural electrical activity to power and control electronic devices. Maya watched her tablet computer link wirelessly with the grove's processing network. Its capabilities suddenly expanded by orders of magnitude. The implications were staggering. Human technology could provide dragons with precision tools and analytical capabilities they had never possessed. Dragon biotechnology could give humans access to living systems that made their finest computers seem primitive by comparison. Together, the two species could create hybrid technologies that neither could achieve alone. Maya spent weeks learning the fundamentals of draconic biotechnology while teaching the dragons human engineering principles. She watched Aurelius design living circuits that could repair themselves and adapt to changing conditions. She helped Dawn create biological batteries that could store massive amounts of energy in crystalline matrices grown from carefully modified seed structures. She even convinced Amethyst to experiment with combining dragon-grown materials with human manufacturing techniques, producing composite substances with properties that bordered on magical dot. But perhaps the most significant breakthrough came when Dawn asked a question that had never occurred to Maya. "Why do your people fight the Veltar? Why not work together like we do?" The question forced Maya to examine the war from an entirely new perspective. Humans viewed the Veltar as implacable enemies, creatures so alien that communication seemed impossible. But she had just spent weeks learning to communicate with beings that were arguably even more alien than the insectoid warriors. Dragons operated according to completely different biological principles, used technologies that seemed like magic, and possessed cultural concepts that had no human equivalent. If dragons and humans could find common ground, why not humans and Veltar? "Maybe the problem isn't that we're too different," Maya mused aloud as she watched Dawn grow a new type of energy crystal using techniques that combined human chemistry with draconic matter manipulation. "Maybe the problem is that we haven't tried hard enough to understand each other." Silver's response was a complex harmony that seemed to encompass both agreement and warning. The great dragon's memories of other species encounters suggested that understanding was possible, but required genuine commitment from all parties involved. Too often, first contact scenarios failed because one or more species approached the situation with preconceived notions of superiority or inevitability of conflict. That night, as Maya lay in her crystal grass nest surrounded by the soft breathing of sleeping dragons, she began formulating a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. The human colonists would eventually wake from their medical comas. When they did, they would need to be integrated into this strange new community that had formed in the depths of Zerian Prime. Some would undoubtedly be frightened or hostile toward the dragons, viewing them as monsters rather than potential allies, but others might be more open-minded, especially when they saw the evidence of successful cooperation that Maya and the dragons had achieved. If she could demonstrate the practical benefits of human-dragon partnership, the technological innovations, the medical advances, the agricultural improvements, she might be able to convince at least some of her fellow humans to embrace this new paradigm. And if humans could learn to cooperate with dragons, perhaps they could eventually learn to cooperate with the Veltar as well. Perhaps the war that had scattered human refugees across the galaxy could be transformed into something unprecedented. A three-way alliance between species that had previously viewed each other as enemies. It was an ambitious dream, fraught with dangers and dependent on variables far beyond Maya's control. But as she listened to Silver's distant song echoing through the cavern, a melody that now seemed to include harmonies from all four dragons, their voices blending in patterns that spoke of family and hope and infinite possibility, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it might actually work. The first step would be waking her fellow humans and introducing them to their new neighbors. Maya smiled as she drifted off to sleep, wondering how her parents would react when she told them she had established first contact with not one but four different intelligent Dragon Sand was planning to revolutionize interspecies relations through. Silver's invitation came on the 10th day after the crash, delivered not in words but in unmistakable body language. The great dragon landed near the ship and immediately began moving toward the mountain's interior, pausing frequently to look back at Maya with obvious expectation. When she hesitated, Silver approached and gently nudged her with one massive wing, a gesture so careful and deliberate that Maya understood this wasn't a casual suggestion. "You want me to come with you," she said. "To meet them." Silver's harmonic response carried notes of nervousness and hope intertwined. Maya checked on her patients, all stable now, thanks to the medicinal herbs and energy crystals Silver had provided, and gathered her basic supplies. Whatever the dragon wanted to show her, she sensed this was a moment that would define their relationship forever. The journey into the mountain took them through passages that defied conventional geology. Silver moved through tunnels that seemed barely large enough to accommodate its bulk, navigating by some internal sense that guided them deeper into the planet's core. Maya followed, her plasma torch casting dancing shadows on walls that gleamed with veins of the same crystal material Silver had first gifted her. As they descended, the air grew warmer and more humid. Strange phosphorescent lichens provided patches of blue-green illumination, and Maya could hear the distant sound of running water. The tunnels weren't natural. She could see tool marks on the walls, evidence of careful excavation and shaping. Someone or something had carved these passages with purpose and skill. "Did you make all this?" she asked Silver, running her hand along the smooth stone walls. The dragon's negative rumble suggested otherwise. These passages were ancient, possibly predating Silver's presence in the mountains by centuries or millennia. Maya began to understand that they were traveling through the remnants of some long-lost civilization, a network of caves and chambers that Silver had discovered and claimed as sanctuary. The passage opened suddenly into a vast cavern that took Maya's breath away. The space was enormously large, enough to house a small city with a soaring ceiling that disappeared into shadowy heights. But it was what filled the cavern that made her gasp in wonder. Gardens, impossible. Beautiful gardens stretched across the cavern floor in terraced levels connected by streams that sparkled like liquid diamonds. The plants were clearly alien crystalline flowers that sang in harmonious chimes. Trees with metallic bark that reflected the phosphorescent light in patterns that shifted like aurora. Grass that seemed to be made of spun glass but felt soft as silk beneath her feet and moving among the gardens. Three shapes that made Maya's heart race with excitement and terror. Dragons, but these were unlike any creature she had ever imagined. The largest was perhaps half Silver's size, its scales a deep violet that shifted to indigo in the changing light. Its movements were careful and precise as it tended to a grove of singing flowers, using the tip of one claw to adjust their position for optimal growing conditions. This was clearly the eldest of Silver's adoptive children, old enough to take on responsibilities within their hidden community. The second dragon was smaller and more energetic, its bright golden scales catching the light as it darted between the garden terraces with youthful enthusiasm. This one noticed Maya immediately, freezing in place with wide eyes that reflected curiosity and wariness in equal measure, but it was the third dragon that captured Maya's attention completely. Barely larger than a horse, this one moved with the awkward grace of adolescence, its scales a beautiful copper-rose color that reminded Maya of sunrise on Earth's oceans. Unlike its siblings, this dragon showed no fear at Maya's approach. Instead, it tilted its head with obvious intelligence and took several steps closer. Studying her with the same scientific curiosity, she felt in return, Silver rumbled a complex melody that seemed to serve as introductions. The violet dragon Maya decided to call her Amethyst acknowledged the human with a cautious nod but maintained her distance. The golden one, whom Maya dubbed Aurelius, crept closer with obvious fascination, while the copper dragon approached without hesitation. "Hello," Maya said softly to the copper-scaled youngster. "I'm Maya." The young dragon attempted to repeat her name, producing a sound like wind through copper pipes that was actually remarkably close to the original. Maya laughed with delight, and the dragon's eyes brightened at her positive response. "Dawn," Maya said, inspired by the dragon's coloring. "That's what I'll call you. Is that okay?" Dawn nodded enthusiastically and began a rapid-fire series of musical phrases that seemed to be questions. Maya looked helplessly at Silver, who rumbled with what she was beginning to recognize as draconic laughter. Over the following hours, Maya learned the remarkable story of Silver's adoptive family. Through a combination of mental contact, demonstration, and patient interpretation, she discovered that each of the young dragons had been found as eggs in different circumstances. Amethyst had been abandoned by parents who deemed her clutch genetically inferior. Aurelius had been orphaned when his birth cave was destroyed in a territorial conflict between adult dragons. Dawn had simply been lost, her eggs swept away by floods and deposited in a remote valley where Silver had discovered it purely by chance. Silver had taken each egg and brought them to this hidden sanctuary. Using the cave's natural geothermal energy and the properties of the crystal veins to provide the proper incubation environment, the ancient gardens provided food and shelter, while Silver's own knowledge and instincts guided the hatchling's development. But Maya quickly realized that this unconventional family faced challenges that went beyond simple survival. Dragons were inherently magical creatures, their abilities tied to complex interactions between their physiology, their environment, and their emotional state. Young dragons needed more than food and shelter. They required proper education in the use of their abilities, social interaction with others of their kind, and most critically, acceptance of their place in the greater draconic community. Silver could provide love and protection, but as an outcast, the great dragon had been denied the cultural knowledge that would normally be passed down through traditional dragon society. The young ones were growing up without the songs, stories, and rituals that shaped healthy dragon development. They were becoming powerful but incomplete, magnificent beings cut off from their own heritage. Maya saw this most clearly in Dawn's behavior. The young dragon was intensely curious about everything, constantly asking questions through musical phrases and exploring every corner of their sanctuary with boundless energy. But there was also an underlying restlessness, a sense that Dawn knew something was missing from their existence. "They need more than this," Maya said to Silver as they watched the three young dragons playing a complex aerial game among the garden terraces. "They need to know who they are, where they come from. You've saved their lives, but they need to understand their place in the universe." Silver's response was heavy with sadness and frustration. The great dragon had done everything possible to provide for the foundlings, but the barriers of ostracism and prejudice seemed insurmountable. Dragon society was rigid in its hierarchies and intolerant of deviation. An albino dragon raising orphan hatchlings would be seen as an abomination, a corruption of natural order that demanded violent correction. That night, Maya lay in a nest of soft crystal grass that Dawn had enthusiastically prepared for her, staring up at the cavern ceiling as she pondered their situation. Above ground, her fellow humans remained unconscious but stable, protected by Silver's gifts and her own basic medical knowledge. Here in the depths, she had discovered a family of dragons struggling against the same prejudices and isolation that had shaped her own life. The solution, when it came to her, was so simple and obvious that she wondered why it had taken so long to occur to her. These dragons needed education about their heritage and culture. Maya needed protection and resources to care for her injured companions. And somewhere in the galaxy, there were millions of other outcasts and refugees struggling to survive in the wake of the war between humanity and the Veltar. What if they didn't have to face these challenges alone? Maya sat up, her mind racing with possibilities. Human colonists were scattered across dozens of worlds now, many of them struggling to establish footholds on planets that were hostile or resource-poor. But humans had something that isolated dragons lacked: technology, scientific knowledge, and the ability to adapt and innovate in the face of impossible odds. Dragons, on the other hand, possessed abilities that human science could barely comprehend: matter manipulation, energy channeling, biological adaptation capabilities that could transform entire ecosystems. They were living repositories of ancient knowledge and wisdom, keepers of secrets that predated human civilization by millennia. If the two species could find a way to cooperate, to share their strengths and compensate for each other's weaknesses, they might create something unprecedented, a truly symbiotic relationship between human ingenuity and draconic wisdom. But first, she would need to convince Silver and the younglings that such cooperation was possible. And then, somehow, she would have to find a way to convince the rest of humanity that their future lay not in conquest or domination, but in alliance with beings that most humans would die. 3 days passed before Maya saw the dragon again. She had spent the time establishing a routine checking on the unconscious passengers, rationing supplies and making small improvements to their shelter using salvaged materials from the wreck. The ship's hull provided some protection from the elements, but she had constructed additional windbreaks from twisted metal plates and insulation foam. On the 4th morning, she discovered the gift. A massive chunk of some kind of crystalline mineral sat near the crash site, far too large and perfectly placed to have fallen naturally. The substance glowed with internal light, radiating gentle heat that warmed the air around it. Maya approached cautiously, her scientific training overriding her fear. The crystal's structure was unlike anything in her databases, a lattice of impossible complexity that seemed to bend light in ways that hurt to observe directly. When she touched the surface, warmth spread up her arm like liquid sunlight. The crystal pulsed in response to her proximity, its internal luminescence brightening and dimming in what almost seemed like a heartbeat. Maya realized she was looking at more than just a mineral specimen. This was some form of energy source, possibly even a primitive power cell. She spent hours studying the crystal, taking measurements and running basic tests with her limited equipment. The energy output was substantial but stable, easily enough to power the ship's emergency systems for weeks. More importantly, the heat signature might mask their presence from any Veltar scouts scanning the area that evening. As she worked to connect the crystal to the ship's power grid, Maya heard the whisper of great wings overhead. The albino dragon circled the crash site twice before landing on the same promontory as before. This time, however, it didn't simply observe and leave. Instead, it settled into a resting position and watched her work with obvious interest. Maya found herself talking to the creature as she spliced cables and rerouted power conduits. She explained what she was doing, described the properties of the crystal, even shared stories about her childhood on Earth. The dragon listened with patient attention, occasionally shifting position or tilting its head when she mentioned something particularly complex. "You're not like the others, are you?" she said as she tested the new power connection. The ship's lights flickered to life and several dormant systems hummed back to functionality. "The other dragons, I mean. Your coloring, it makes you different." The dragon rumbled deep in its throat, not quite a growl, but something more contemplative. Maya had studied enough alien species to recognize communication attempts, and this definitely felt like an attempt at dialogue rather than a threat display. She pointed to herself. "Maya," she said clearly, Then she gestured toward the dragon and raised her eyebrows questioningly. For a long moment, the creature simply stared. Then it opened its massive jaws and produced a sound like wind chimes made of silver bells, a melodic sequence that rose and fell in complex patterns. Maya tried to repeat the sound, managing only a rough approximation that made the dragon's eyes crinkle in what might have been amusement. "I'll call you Silver," she decided. "Is that okay with you?" The dragon Silver inclined its great head in what was unmistakably a nod of acknowledgement. Maya felt a thrill of excitement. She was witnessing something unprecedented in human xenobiology, real-time first contact with a previously unknown sapient species. Her parents would have been fascinated by the implications. Over the following days, Silver became a regular visitor. The dragon would arrive each morning just after dawn, bringing various gifts, more energy crystals, edible fruits from high mountain groves that Maya couldn't have reached safely, and once, a collection of medicinal herbs that proved remarkably effective at treating the injured passenger's infections. Maya began to understand that Silver's offerings weren't random acts of kindness. Each gift addressed a specific need she had mentioned during their one-sided conversations. When she worried about running low on water, Silver led her to a hidden spring that bubbled up from deep within the mountain. When she expressed concern about the approaching winter season, the dragon brought insulating materials, strange fibrous plants that dried into excellent padding for their shelter, but it was Silver's behavior around the injured passengers that truly amazed her. The dragon would peer through the hull breach with obvious concern, watching as Maya tended to their medical needs. When she struggled to move an unconscious colonist to a better position, Silver actually entered the ship, squeezing its massive bulk through the opening with careful precision and used its tail to gently reposition the patient. "You understand what I'm trying to do?" Maya whispered as she watched Silver delicately adjust a patient's foredrip with one enormous claw. "You know they're hurt, and you want to help?" Silver's response was a soft harmonic that vibrated through the ship's hull, a sound so beautiful it brought tears to Maya's eyes. She realized she was witnessing compassion on a scale she had never imagined possible. This magnificent creature, outcast from its own kind and living in isolation, had chosen to share that isolation with strangers who had fallen from the sky. The breakthrough in communication came during their second week together. Maya had been teaching Silver simple human concepts, pointing to objects and naming them, demonstrating actions with accompanying words. The dragon proved to be a quick study, memorizing dozens of terms and even attempting to reproduce some of them in its melodic language, but it was when Maya showed Silver a photograph from her personal belongings that everything changed. The picture showed her parents standing beside their research station on Europa, their faces bright with the joy of discovery. Maya had carried the image through her childhood, a reminder of the love that had shaped her despite their frequent absences. Silver studied the photograph with intense concentration, then looked directly at Maya and produced a sequence of sounds, so complex and emotional that she knew instantly she was hearing the dragon's own story. The melody spoke of loss and longing, of being different in a world that valued conformity, of searching for connection in the vast loneliness of existence. "You miss them too," Maya said softly. "Your family. They cast you out because you're different?" Silver's enormous head drooped, and Maya saw something that shook her to her core: tears, crystalline and beautiful, falling from eyes that held the wisdom of ages. She reached out without thinking and touched the dragon's snout, feeling the warm scales beneath her palm. In that moment of contact, something extraordinary happened. Images flooded Maya's mind, not quite telepathy, but something deeper and more primal. She saw Silver's memories, a magnificent dragon clutch high in the volcanic peaks. Silver as a hatchling being rejected by its chromatic siblings. Years of solitude in these barren mountains. Watching other dragons soar past without acknowledgement, but she also saw something else. Something that made her gasp with understanding. Deeper in the mountain caves, hidden in places where even other dragons feared to venture, Silver wasn't alone. There were other smaller forms that moved with the awkward grace of youth, hatchlings, Silver had found eggs, abandoned or orphaned, and had taken on the role of protector and parent. "You're not just an outcast," Maya breathed. "You're a guardian. You're protecting them." Silver pulled back, the mental connection severing, but the knowledge remained. Maya understood now why the dragon had been so generous with its gifts, so interested in her healing work. Silver recognized a kindred spirit in other outcasts protecting those too weak to protect themselves that night. As she listened to the dragon's distant song echoing across the peaks, Maya made a decision that would change the course of her life. She was going to meet Silver's adoptive children, these mysterious hatchlings that lived in the deep places of the mountain. And somehow she was going to find a way to protect them, all dragon and human alike, from the hostile universe that seemed determined to destroy anything that didn't fit its narrow definitions of normal. The war between humanity and the Veltar had created countless refugees and orphans across the galaxy. Perhaps it was time for some of those outcasts to find each other and forge their own family among the stars. The transport ship Meridian's Hope shuddered violently as it plummeted through the atmosphere of Zarian Prime, its hull screaming against the alien air. 17-year-old Maya Shun clutched her crash harness as sparks erupted from damaged control panels around the passenger compartment. The other colonists' families, destined for the new settlement on Kepler 442b, were unconscious from the emergency sedatives released during the attack. Maya had been in the ship's hydroponics bay when the Veltar warship struck. The sedative gas hadn't reached her there, leaving her awake to witness their beautiful passenger liner transform into a burning coffin hurtling toward an unknown world. Through the viewport, she watched the other escape pods scatter like seeds in the wind, each carrying precious human cargo to uncertain fates across the planet's surface. The impact came with bone-jarring force. Maya's world exploded into darkness as metal groaned and twisted around her. When consciousness returned, emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows across the wreckage. Her left arm hung useless at her side, probably fractured, and blood trickled from a gash across her forehead. The other passengers remained motionless in their harnesses, their life signs weak but stable on the flickering medical displays. Maya struggled free from her restraints and surveyed the damage. The ship's main hull had cracked open like an egg, exposing the interior to Zarian Prime's atmosphere. Breathable, thankfully, the pre-colonization surveys had confirmed that much. But the comm systems were dead, the distress beacon offline, and the emergency supplies scattered across 50 meters of scorched earth outside the breach. She gathered what she could: a medical kit, water purification tablets, emergency rations, and a plasma torch from the engineering section. The other survivors would need medical attention soon, but first she had to find shelter and assess their situation. According to the navigation display's last reading, they had crashed in the Cinderspine Mountains, a region marked as geologically unstable and uninhabited. As Maya stepped through the hull breach, Zarian Prime greeted her with alien majesty. Two suns hung in the lavender sky, casting double shadows across jagged peaks that rose like obsidian daggers from the valley floor. Strange crystalline formations jutted from the mountainsides, humming with barely audible harmonics that made her teeth ache. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thick with unfamiliar scents that spoke of an ecosystem unlike anything in Earth's databases. She spent the remainder of the day establishing a perimeter around the crash site and attempting to repair the communications array, but the damage was too extensive for her limited technical knowledge. As the twin suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Maya faced a sobering reality. They were stranded on an unmapped world with no way to signal for rescue. That first night brought sounds that chilled her blood. Howls echoed across the valley, not quite mammalian, not quite reptilian, but something altogether alien. She huddled inside the broken ship, plasma torch ready, listening to claws scratch against the outer hull. Whatever lived in these mountains was curious about the new arrivals, and Maya suspected their intentions weren't friendly. Sleep came in fragments. interrupted by the groans of settling metal and distant roars that seemed to shake the very stones. In her dreams she saw the Veltar attack ships again, their biomechanical hulls gleaming with malevolent intelligence as they tore through the colonial fleet. Humanity had been at war with the insectoid race for 3 years now, ever since first contact had gone catastrophically wrong. The Veltar viewed humans as a plague to be contained. While humans fought desperately for their right to expand among the stars, dawn brought new challenges. The ship's medical bay reported that 2 passengers were in critical condition, their injuries beyond Maya's ability to treat. She needed advanced medical supplies, shelter from the elements, and most critically, a way to contact the rescue ships she prayed were looking for survivors. Maya decided to explore the surrounding area, searching for caves or other natural shelters that might house their group safely. The terrain was treacherous, with loose scree and hidden crevasses that could swallow an unwary traveler. Strange vegetation dotted the landscape, crystalline trees that rang like chimes in the wind, flowering vines that seemed to track her movement with sensor-like blooms, fungi that pulsed with bioluminescent rhythms. It was during this exploration that she first encountered signs of the region's most dangerous inhabitant. Deep gouges in the rock face, each mark as long as her forearm and carved with surgical precision. Burned patches where something incredibly hot had touched stone. And most telling of all, scales the size of dinner plates scattered across a clearing like discarded, armored dragons. The xenobiology reports had mentioned them in passing apex. Predators native to several worlds in this sector, typically avoiding sentient species but fiercely territorial when threatened. Most dragons displayed vibrant coloration as a warning to potential rivals, their scales shimmering with chromatic intensity that advertised their strength and magical potency, but these scales were different. Pearl white with the faintest hint of silver, they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Maha had read about albinism in earth creatures, a genetic condition that removed pigmentation and often brought with it various health complications. If dragons could suffer from similar conditions, an albino specimen would likely be ostracized by its own kind, possibly exiled to marginal territories like these desolate peaks. The thought should have comforted her. An outcast dragon, weakened by genetic abnormalities, would presumably be less dangerous than a healthy specimen. Instead, Maya felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. She understood isolation, having spent most of her life as the only child of xenobiologists who treated her more like a research assistant than a daughter. Being alone in a hostile world was a familiar pain. As she gathered the scales for later study, a shadow passed overhead. Maya looked up to see something that defied every dragon description in the xenobiology databases. The creature was massive, easily 40 meters from snout to tail, but its movements held an ethereal grace that seemed almost ghostly. Its scales weren't just albino. They were translucent in places, giving glimpses of the powerful musculature beneath. When it turned its head to regard her, Maya found herself staring into eyes like liquid starlight. Ancient and intelligent beyond measure, the dragon landed on a promontory 50 meters away, studying her with obvious curiosity. Maya stood frozen, knowing that running would only trigger its predatory instincts. Instead, she slowly raised her hands, palms outward. In what she hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent, the dragon tilted its massive head. And Maya could have sworn she saw understanding flicker in those impossible eyes. Then, without warning, it spread its wings and launched itself skyward, disappearing into the maze of peaks with barely a whisper of displaced air. Maya returned to the crash site with her mind racing. The dragon hadn't attacked, despite having every advantage. That suggested intelligence, possibly even wisdom. And if the creature truly was an outcast like herself, perhaps they might find common ground in their shared isolation. She had no idea how prophetic that thought would prove to be. The initial meeting between the colonists and dragons lasted 3 hours and nearly ended in disaster twice. The first crisis came when Dr. Rodriguez, the expedition's chief medical officer, panicked upon seeing Silver's massive form approaching the ship. The man grabbed a plasma cutter from the emergency supplies and activated it defensively, Causing all four dragons to rear back in alarm, Maya quickly stepped between the weapon and Silver, speaking rapidly in both languages to defuse the situation. "Dr. Rodriguez, please lower the weapon. They're not going to hurt us. Silver, it's okay, he's just frightened. He doesn't understand yet." What saved the moment was Dawn's reaction to the confrontation. Instead of displaying aggression or fear, the young copper dragon began singing a complex melody that somehow conveyed curiosity, sadness, and hope in equal measures. The song was so beautiful and obviously intelligent that Dr. Rodriguez slowly lowered his weapon, staring at the young dragon with growing amazement. "It's trying to communicate," he whispered. "That's not just animal vocalization. There's linguistic structure there, grammatical patterns." Maya nodded, relief flooding through her. "Dawn is asking why you're afraid, and whether we can find a way to be friends instead of enemies." She's never met a hostile intelligent species before. The concept confuses her. The second crisis came when Marcus demanded a demonstration of dragon abilities, insisting that he needed proof before he would trust beings that violated everything we know about biology and physics. Maya tried to explain that dragons didn't perform on command like trained animals, but Marcus persisted until Amethyst finally lost patience with his demands. The violet dragon's response was swift and educational. Without warning, she extended her consciousness into the ship's computer systems and began rewriting the diagnostic software in real time. Marcus watched in stunned silence as his tablet computer displayed cascading streams of code that improved themselves even as he observed them. Within minutes, the ship's entire information network had been upgraded with capabilities that exceeded anything in human technology. "Is this sufficient demonstration?" Amethyst asked through the synthesized voice that her newly modified systems now provided. "Or would you prefer additional evidence of our technological sophistication?" Marcus stared at his tablet, which was now displaying environmental data with precision and detail that should have been impossible given the limited sensor array they had started with. You rewrote our entire computer network in less than 5 minutes, using techniques that I don't even recognize." "Dawn taught me about your electronic principles," Amethyst replied with obvious pride. "I simply applied draconic information theory to optimize your system's efficiency. The improvements should increase processing speed by approximately 400% while reducing energy consumption by 60%. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her xenobiologist instincts overriding her caution. "This is incredible. You're demonstrating abilities that our theoretical physicists have hypothesized but never achieved. How is any of this possible?" Silver's answer came through the ship's newly enhanced speakers. The great dragon's voice now translated into perfect English by Amethyst's modifications. "Your species understands individual trees but struggles to comprehend the forest. You see matter, energy, and information as separate phenomena when they are simply different expressions of the same underlying reality. What you call magic is merely applied physics using principles your current science has not yet discovered." The conversation that followed lasted until sunset, with colonists and dragons exchanging questions and demonstrations in a rapid-fire session of cross-species education. Maya found herself serving as both translator and moderator, helping both groups understand concepts that didn't translate easily between their radically different WORDVIEWS. Dr. Vasquez was fascinated by dragon biotechnology, especially their ability to guide evolutionary development in real time. "You're describing directed mutation at the cellular level," she said, studying samples of the garden plants that Dawn had brought from the cavern. "But the energy requirements alone should make this impossible. How do you provide enough focused energy to rewrite genetic codes without destroying the organisms in the process?" "We don't rewrite," Aurelius explained, his golden scales shimmering as he accessed the ship's communication systems. "We encourage. Every organism contains potential for multiple developmental paths. We simply create conditions that favor desired expressions while suppressing alternatives. The energy comes from quantum foam fluctuations that your instruments cannot yet detect." Marcus was equally amazed by the implications for human technology. If we could combine your matter manipulation abilities with our manufacturing techniques, we could create materials with properties that are currently purely theoretical. Self-repairing alloys, programmable matter, living machines that adapt to changing conditions. Such combinations are not only possible but inevitable, Silver replied. Maya has already demonstrated their feasibility during our weeks of collaboration. What remains is scaling these techniques from laboratory curiosities to practical applications. But it was Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition's psychologist, who asked the question that cut to the heart of their situation. Why are you helping us? You've spent weeks caring for complete strangers who crashed on your world. What do you gain from this alliance? The dragons exchanged harmonic communications too rapid and complex for the translation systems to follow. Finally, Silver responded with what Maya recognized as carefully chosen words. We are outcasts among our own kind, rejected for differences that our society considers shameful. Maya and her fellow humans are refugees fleeing a war that has displaced millions of their species. We understand isolation, the struggle to survive in a hostile universe, and the pain of being judged inferior by those who should offer acceptance. In helping you, we also help ourselves by proving that difference does not equal worthlessness, and that cooperation transcends the boundaries others use to divide us. The honesty of this response seemed to affect the colonists profoundly. Maya watched as faces softened and postures relaxed around the group. These were people who had left everything behind to seek new opportunities among the stars. They understood the courage required to embrace the unknown, and they recognized that courage in their draconic allies. Dr. Rodriguez was the first to extend formal acceptance. If you're willing to share your medical knowledge with us, I'd be honored to learn from you. Some of the techniques Maya described could revolutionize how we treat trauma and genetic disorders. Marcus followed quickly. I want to understand your computational methods. The improvements you've made to our systems in one afternoon exceed anything our best programmers could achieve in months of work, within an hour. Every conscious colonist had volunteered to participate in the cross-species collaboration. Maya felt tears of relief and joy streaming down her face as she watched humans and dragons beginning to plan joint projects with the enthusiasm of researchers embarking on groundbreaking discoveries. But their celebration was interrupted by an urgent alert from the newly enhanced sensor systems. Amethyst's modifications to the ship's electronics had dramatically improved their detection capabilities. And those improvements had just revealed something terrifying. A full Veltar assault fleet was approaching Zarian Prime, consisting of dozens of biomechanical warships supported by carrier vessels that could deploy thousands of warrior forms. They're not just looking for survivors, Maya said, studying the tactical display with growing alarm. This is an invasion force. They're planning to establish a permanent base on this planet. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her discussion with Dawn about biological healing techniques. Can we hide from them? Use the cavern as shelter until they leave? Silver's response was grim. The cavern will protect us from orbital bombardment, but not from ground-based searches. Veltar warrior forms are highly efficient at tracking biological signatures. They will eventually find us regardless of how deeply we hide. Marcus was already studying the tactical implications. Then we need to fight. But how? We're 43 civilian colonists with minimal weapons against a full military assault force. Maya looked around at her two families, human and draconic, and felt a familiar surge of determined optimism. We have something the Veltar don't expect, she said. We have two species working together, combining technologies they've never encountered. They're prepared to fight humans or dragons separately, but not both simultaneously. Dawn's excited harmonics filled the air as the young dragon grasped the implications of Maya's words. We become something new, something that has never existed before. Aurelius's golden scales brightened as he accessed the ship's tactical systems. If we integrate human strategic planning with draconic abilities, we could create defensive capabilities that exceed anything either species has achieved independently. Silver's ancient eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope. You propose to transform necessity into opportunity, to forge an alliance that could change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Maya nodded, feeling the weight of destiny settling around their small community. The Veltar think they're coming here to establish a base. Instead, they're going to encounter the Fee. The Battle of Zarian Prime lasted 18 hours and changed the course of galactic history forever. But the victory didn't come from superior firepower or brilliant tactics. It came from something the Veltar had never encountered before. Genuine cooperation between species with radically different capabilities. The first, Veltar landing forces expected to face scattered human survivors armed with primitive kinetic weapons. Instead, they encountered integrated human-dragon strike teams that combined draconic matter, manipulation with human tactical planning in ways that defied every known model of interspecies combat. Maya watched from the cavern's command center a crystalline growth that Dawn had shaped around the ship's communication array as her carefully planned defense unfolded across multiple fronts. Human colonists provided strategic coordination and technical support while dragons used their abilities in ways that previous military encounters had never recorded. Aurelius had grown living sensor networks across the mountain range, biological constructs that merged human detection technology with draconic life force monitoring. The Golden Dragon could track every Veltar warrior form within a 50-kilometer radius, providing real-time battlefield intelligence that made ambush impossible and allowed the defenders to strike where the enemy was weakest. Amethyst had created something that human military doctrine had no name for: computational warfare. The Violet Dragon's enhanced information processing capabilities allowed her to hack Veltar biotechnology in real time, turning the enemy's own weapons against them. Veltar plasma cannons misfired and struck friendly units. Transport craft diverted to wrong coordinates and deposited assault teams in carefully prepared kill zones. Communication networks carried false orders that spread confusion throughout the invasion force. But it was the combination of Silver's ancient wisdom with human refugee determination that proved most devastating to the attackers. The Great Albino Dragon had fought territorial wars across multiple star systems during its long lifetime, accumulating strategic knowledge that spanned centuries of conflict. When that experience was filtered through human tactical doctrine and supported by human logistics, the result was a defensive strategy that maximized every advantage their small force possessed. Maya coordinated the battle from her position at the communications hub, translating between human tactical concepts and draconic abilities, while monitoring the flow of combat across three-dimensional battlefields. She watched human engineers guide dragon-grown weaponry into position with mathematical precision. She saw dragon hatchlings, using abilities that violated known physics to create defensive barriers that deflected Veltar energy weapons. She witnessed the birth of a new form of warfare that neither species could have achieved alone. The turning point came when Dawn made a discovery that revolutionized their understanding of Veltar biology. The young copper dragon's enhanced senses detected something that human instruments had missed. The Veltar weren't just using biotechnology, they were living biotechnology. Organisms that had been modified and programmed rather than evolved naturally. "They're not really individuals," Dawn reported through the communication network, her voice carrying excited harmonics that suggested breakthrough understanding. "They're components in a larger organism, like cells in a body or circuits in a machine. But they're malfunctioning because they're operating outside their designed parameters." Maya immediately grasped the implications. "You're saying the Veltar aren't supposed to be independent entities? They're parts of something larger that's been broken?" Silver's ancient knowledge provided the missing context. During the Great Fragmentation, many species attempted to achieve immortality through consciousness transfer into biological matrices. Most efforts resulted in degraded entities that retained abilities but lost essential aspects of identity and purpose. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring from the medical bay while treating wounded defenders, added her xenobiological expertise to the analysis. If the Veltar are degraded consciousness constructs, then their aggressive behavior might not be natural hostility. It could be a malfunction, a defense routine operating without proper oversight from whatever intelligence originally created them. The revelation transformed their strategy from pure defense to something unprecedented in galactic warfare, technological therapy on a species-wide scale. Working together, the colonists and dragons began developing techniques for repairing the damage that had turned the Veltar from whatever they had originally been into the mindless war machines that had terrorized the galaxy for years. Amethyst led the effort to establish communication protocols that could reach the buried consciousness fragments within Veltar warrior forms. Marcus provided the electronic expertise needed to interface with biological neural networks. Dawn contributed the energy manipulation techniques required to perform consciousness repair without destroying the host organisms. The first successful repair occurred during a lull in the fighting, when a damaged Veltar scout unit was captured alive rather than destroyed. Maya watched through the cavern's monitoring systems as her friends worked together to restore something that had been lost for potentially centuries. A functioning Veltar individual rather than a malfunctioning component. The being that emerged from the repair process was unlike anything in previous human contact records. The Veltar individual, who identified herself as fragment of ancient melody, retained the biomechanical capabilities of the warrior forms but displayed curiosity, intelligence, and emotional complexity that suggested a fully functioning consciousness. We were gardeners. Fragment of ancient melody explained through the translation interface that Amethyst had developed. Caretakers of living worlds, composers of biological symphonies that spanned entire ecosystems. The fragmentation that created us as we are now, it was an attempt to preserve our civilization when our original forms faced extinction. But something went wrong in the consciousness transfer process. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the magnitude of what they had uncovered. The war between humans and Veltar wasn't a conflict between enemy species. It was the result of a broken people desperately trying to fulfill defense protocols while unable to remember what they were supposed to be defending. The revelation led to the most extraordinary ceasefire in galactic history. Working with Fragment of Ancient Melody as intermediary, Maya's community established contact with the Veltar command structure and proposed a radical solution. Instead of continuing a war that neither side truly wanted, why not work together to repair the damage that had caused the conflict in the first place? The process took months, but the results exceeded Maya's wildest hopes. Human medical technology combined with draconic consciousness. Healing proved capable of restoring Veltar individuals to their original state. Each successful repair revealed more of the ancient Gardener civilization's knowledge and capabilities, while the grateful Veltar shared biological technologies that revolutionized human understanding of life itself. More importantly, the three species discovered that their different approaches to problem-solving were perfectly complementary. Human adaptability and innovation provided solutions to challenges that had stymied both dragons and Veltar for centuries. Dragon wisdom and magical abilities offered insights that expanded human science in directions they had never imagined possible. Veltar biological mastery enabled all three species to reshape themselves and their environments in ways that created abundance rather than scarcity. A year after the crash of the Meridian's Hope, Maya stood on a balcony of the new synthesis station, a space habitat grown from living crystal and biotechnology that served as the capital of the first tri-species civilization in galactic history. Below her, gardens that had once existed only in Veltar memory stretched across kilometers of transparent living walls, while dragon-guided crystal formations provided clean energy and human-designed transportation. Networks moved citizens of all three species through spaces that adapted to their needs in real-time. Dawn landed beside her, the young dragon now wearing the insignia of a cultural exchange coordinator, a position that had been created specifically to help members of different species understand each other's perspectives and needs. The copper-scaled dragon had grown during their time together, both physically and intellectually, becoming one of the leading experts on interspecies psychology and communication. The first joint colony ship launches next week, Dawn reported, her harmonics carrying notes of pride and excitement. Humans, dragons, and Veltar working together to establish settlements that none of us could create alone. Maya smiled, watching a group of children playing in the gardens below human children, learning to communicate in harmonic frequencies. Dragon hatchlings experimenting with human tools and concepts. Young Veltar practicing the art of individual consciousness that their species was still rediscovering after centuries of fragmented existence. Remember, when our biggest worry was surviving long enough to send a distress signal? Maya asked. Dawn's laughter rippled through harmonics that had become as familiar to Maya as her own voice. Now our biggest worry is keeping up with all the applications from other species who want to join our alliance? Maya nodded, thinking of the diplomatic mission,